Hi, I'm Nina Bosky, and welcome to Life Bites, where each and every week we'll get you inspired in the areas of life, business, and media. We'll help you dare, dream, do, and be so you can get out of your head into your soul in order to tune in and take a bite. This week, we're getting you media inspired. Hi, everybody, and welcome again to Media Inspired. I have a special guest with me today. He is a fellow colleague. He's also a media executive. He and I have worked on projects together, Maryland Behind the Icon, all around Marilyn Monroe. But he's worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are wanting to get into radio and podcasting in the media world. He's been in media for a very long time, behind the camera, writing for broadcasting, and of course, in the radio and podcasting field. So welcome, Randall.
Thanks, Nita, for having me on today with you.
Well, in this media inspired segment, there's so much information out there about podcasting, about radio. Tell us a little bit about your experience so people can get a better kind of read on who you are and what you've done.
Well, in my early 30s, I left Los Angeles and I moved east to be closer to my family. And I worked for Ernst & Young and for the United States government in their media division and U.S. State Department for a while. So I was a journalist. For a while, working in international news, writing breaking news when I was at the State Department, and I started a media archive. And then in 2005, I was really taken with the internet. And I thought that it was amazing what could be done. I started seeing people started doing audio radio shows. And I found this company in Phoenix, Arizona, where I live now. And they had a proprietary technology where they could stream audio and video, and they were doing hour programs every hour, like on a schedule, like a radio station. And it was a network. And I went in and met these people. And I ended up working with them as an independent producer, bringing in celebrity clients, high-level professionals, creating podcasts. So I've been still doing that over the past 18 years. And I produced over 200 individual podcasts, developed them from the ground up, and built audiences. And I've had over 20 shows that have done over 1 million downloads. And
including ours.
Including Goodnight Maryland Radio and so forth. Yeah. So it's what I do for an individual professional is take their story, their life experience, their media brand, their professional expertise, and craft that into a podcast or a video series and help them get their message out there, promote their brand. Sometimes I work with an individual or a company in terms of developing their media strategy for what they do, because a media strategy encompasses your business, your brand, the message of that brand, and crafting that into a podcast or a video series that's really going to have appeal and be relevant to audiences. And one of the things that podcasters really miss is they don't focus their program and their messaging for the audience. They think their expertise and people are just going to listen to it.
So what I get to, Randall, is that a lot of people, to your point, start talking about their brand, their topic, but they talk about it from their point of view, not looking at it from the perspective of what does my audience want to hear? What's the benefit to my audience? And so what do you think some of the most or the biggest misconceptions about podcasting today? Because I don't know about you, but every time I turn around, somebody's starting a podcast.
Well, starting a podcast, you really have to consider who are you talking to? In the entertainment business, the first question out of any producer's mouth when the property is put in front of them or an idea is put in front of them, it's who's the audience for this? Who's this for? And that's really where you start anything. It's not what it's about. It's where your particular media project is directed to. What audience is going to be? An older audience, younger audience? What's their interest? All of that. You have to really consider that first. Podcasters who are business people don't always think about that, but when audiences listen to a podcast, if they're disinterested after 30 seconds or a minute and they turn you off, there's a reason why. So you really have to engage an audience coming out of the box, and you really have to continually throughout your program on a continual basis speak to the audience, because that's who's listening. You're speaking to your guests, but also I tell my hosts, and they go through my training, one ear is on your guest, one ear is on the audience. So that's how you should be doing your show.
And what would you say for somebody that wants to start a podcast? Do you think it should be 30-minute podcast, an hour podcast? What do you think is really working now? Because podcasting has evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. When we started launched Goodnight Maryland, there wasn't even a mention of podcasting. It was still radio, right? And that was only 5 or 6 years ago. So what is the kind of secret sauce to podcasting today?
Well, you really have to consider, and people use the word, the attention span of the audience. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's anything such as an attention span. I think it's whether what you're talking about is relevant and the audience is giving you the consideration of their ear. Mm-hmm. So it has nothing to do, if people are watching 18-hour binging through television series, they have attention spans. What they're not is they're not interested in what you're talking about. So you have to engage them in a way, and once you've got their attention, you want to keep them engaged in what you're talking about. So for those people who think, well, I got to do a podcast that's 15 minutes, so people are not going to be able to listen to it for 15 minutes. That doesn't matter as long as what you're talking about is interesting.
Yeah. And so where do you see where people's pitfalls, besides the one that we just mentioned, which is, are you listening to what the audience wants versus what you just want to talk about? Because I think that's the biggest challenge. I remember it was probably about 6 or 7 months ago. I was listening to different podcasts for around Marilyn Monroe. And there's one particularly, Randall, these two girls got on and they were talking about, no, it wasn't Marilyn Monroe, it was Sex and the City. And they were talking about Sex and the City, but it wasn't bringing me in as an audience member. I didn't feel like I was a fly on the wall. I felt like it was like I was cut out of the conversation. So it didn't make me want to stay in the show because it didn't feel like it was inclusive. So that's one area. Is there other things that people are not paying attention to when they're starting a podcast?
A few things. One is having a proper format based around your idea. Another one is having good interviewing skills. That's really important. How many times have you heard a podcast where the host says to the guest, why don't you tell the audience about what you do? That's a host who's not done their homework. If you listen to the way that, major entertainment talk shows, how they introduce guests is they don't say their name. They build that audience up to be excited up for that guest by giving a laundry list of their accomplishments and then saying, and here he is, and then the name. That's how professionals do it. So if you're not doing things like that, then you need to talk to someone and get some media coaching. I do that for all of my hosts. We go through how to engage with guests, how to interview them, how to manage the guest on the show so you stay in control of the conversation. One ear is to your audience. You have to watch a clock sometimes if you are on a format where you have breaks with commercials. All of that is important information to be able to keep, to have your show continually engage that audience. There's three things that you have to do with how you craft the format of your show. One is you have to have something that hooks the audience at the beginning. Two, you have to introduce the idea of what you're talking about that week and make it sound really interesting that people want to stay engaged. And the third thing is that you have to do a wrap at the end where you summarize what the audience has heard and have something that they can easily, like sound bites, they can take away with at the end.
Okay. So let's back up the truck a little bit here with you because you provide a lot of different services. We left off where you were working for this company, studio company in Phoenix, but now you've launched your own media studio. Talk to us a little bit about what your services are because for people that are looking at and listening to this media show, they are going to be inspired and be thinking about, do I want to do a podcast? What can I do to expand my podcast that I might already have? And what services do you provide so that if they call you, when they call you, what do you offer?
Sure, sure. Well, I offer a couple of things that are my main things. And one of those is developing a podcast for a professional. What I really recommend today is I have a new program that I've recently launched called my Media Strategy Program, where I go through everything that you need to know about building what I would say an empire in terms of around your content. So that is the expansion of your business and your reputation along with the show. So that's looking at everything from the idea of the show, your brand, the production of it, the content itself, your company's message or your expertise, your reputation and your messaging, and then how are audiences engaging with it through social and through SEO and search. And then you're looking at things like in my program, the Media Strategy Program talks about what happens after the show is established, which is repurposing the content, repackaging it, reselling it, advertising, how to get sponsors and advertisers for your show, and how to use that reputation that you've built online in terms of being a speaker. If you're an author, promote your books and all of that. So it's a comprehensive strategy on the internet as well as creating a show. And that all comes together in the Media Strategy Program. Now, if you're not creating a show and you already have a show and you want to learn how to do it better, that's part of that same program as well.
And how long does that program last?
6 weeks. It's about an hour a week.
Okay. Hour a week. Okay. So here's the big thing for all of us, because right now the podcasting is such a saturated marketplace.
Right.
Can people really make money podcasting anymore? Because when it first started, there was, people were throwing money at it like they were throwing it at the internet. Now it's starting to kind of self-regulate. What Joe Rogan, did when he first started, he would have a hard time today capturing that audience the way that he did. So my question to you, I'm not saying that he's not a good podcaster. I'm just saying that it's flooded now. Everybody, has a podcast, whether they should have one or not, they actually do. So can you actually, because I see these ads all the time coming up on Instagram, make money podcasting, make money podcasting.
Oh, yeah.
And here we had one of the biggest Marilyn Monroe podcasts out there. And general advertisers, I would say, would be more difficult if you're not in the millions and millions and millions. A million, 1.5 million, 2 million is good, but some people are getting that in a week. Look at Joe Rogan, 100 million. You know what I mean? So,
well, when you hear these numbers in terms of what audiences are for particular shows, they're always inflated. Terrestrial broadcasters used to inflate their
like
numbers.
Twitter followers?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. When people look at the engagement of an individual and they look at their social following, that's great. But how many people are actually following that every week?
Mm-hmm.
What's more important is your actual listener statistics. How many people are continually listening to your show on a consistent basis? What is your actual audience engagement? I have my phone, I click on that podcast, I hear that podcast. That's one listener. You can have 50,000 Twitter followers, but how many listeners do you have for your podcast every week? So that's the first thing, is get yourself on a good distribution platform to be able to look at that audience and see where they are.
Yeah.
Um,
I,
so that's the first thing to understand, is a social following is not an audience. That's a social following. You want to look at actual listener engagement. Having that data, that's where you can approach a sponsor and advertiser, because that's what they want. And now those listener statistics have to be IAB certified. So all of this is important industry stuff. What I teach in my program, the media strategy program, that's part of that, to understand how to translate all these different things. What is a social following? What is an actual listener engagement? That's an important fact to know for any professional. I would say in my 18 years working with major speakers and authors and some celebrities, the one thing that I would say to all these guys who teach podcasting is, or if you're considering working with there's some good ones out there. The first thing I would say is, how many actual podcasts have you developed and produced for an individual that have done close to 1 million downloads? I have over 20. I don't know how many of those guys have done, but I have, over shows that I've developed as a producer and crafted that show. In the industry, in the entertainment industry, it's the crafting of the show that makes, that makes the difference. Sponsorship and advertising is the fourth thing that makes money for a radio show. There's three other things that are, that are more
and what are
profitable
they
before
again?
that.
And what are
I will
they?
tell you what they are. There's four things. If you take advertising and sponsorship as the fourth, the first is repackaging, repurposing, and reselling content. The second is leveraging your reputation, especially if you're a speaker. Okay. The third thing is media engagement on major media. So that's an important thing to promote your brand, your message, your reputation. And that's with knowing how to be on television and, maybe working with PR representative to get you booked. That's going to increase your reputation as well. So these are things that actually make you money. And the fourth thing is, you have enough of an audience after you had your show on for a while that you can actually approach an advertiser or pitch an advertiser to say, well, I have 30,000 downloads a week or 150,000 a week and so forth. Yeah, and they might buy an advertiser might buy an ad that's $400 a week or something like that, for a month or something to test it out, and they want to see if it's tracking.
Yeah.
So
Well, and that's the thing
that's
with today's
there's a lot
podcasting.
to that, and I have a number of shows that have major advertisers, but they built their audiences literally over years.
Yeah.
So
Well, and sometimes that's what it takes, particularly in this marketplace. So, how do you know if somebody has a good podcast?
well, the first thing is, when I look at that show on a platform like iTunes or Spotify, the first thing that people are going to see is the graphic. Okay. So if I'm looking at a show for the first time, what does the graphic look like? And one of the things that I work with my host on is creating a graphic that's going to be attractive to people and communicates the message of the theme of your show and people looking at that single image. A lot of people just put a title up and their face. Okay, well, how many shows are there exactly like that? There's nothing unique about that. That again comes into crafting the brand design of your podcast, your main podcast image, that it says something subliminally or metaphorically about the theme of your show, as well as having an engaging title. And when selecting a title, you have to select a title that's not a product, a company, or a service, or the name of some brand. The reason for doing that is so you can optimize the actual words. Like a show years ago that I coined just off the top of my head, meeting these people for the first time, was it talked about, it was a show about living the sexy lifestyle. But they couldn't tell me what the market name was for their show. And I said, well, you live this lifestyle and it's kind of sexy. So it's a sexy lifestyle. Well, that became the title of the show, which is now a huge brand. And now everybody uses that phrase in terms of talking about this market. And that just came
Wow.
out of my mouth one day.
Yeah. So I think the thing is that we're in a crowded podcasting environment. There's other people that maybe just want to be good at being able to be interviewed. Do you help in those areas as well? Let's say they don't want to produce anything, they just want to have some media coaching. Do you offer that as well?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, how to be on camera. And there's a couple people that I know who teach that online. There's a wonderful, one of my former hosts on LinkedIn, and people are interested in knowing more about that. Yeah, I teach that in my program a little bit about how to prepare yourself on camera, how to speak in sound bites. Usually, a
Oh
TV
my
appearance
gosh.
is two
Wait, wait,
minute
wait,
is
wait, wait, wait,
two
wait, wait, wait.
minutes.
Don't go over that one. How to speak in sound bites. I'm going to share this with you. I've been interviewing people for over 10 years now, right? And some of my most savvy media people go on and on and on and on and on, and you can't even get a word in edgewise, and it becomes a monologue instead of a dialogue. So that it doesn't really matter how much you've been in the media, you got to learn how to use sound bites and listen for cues, particularly if the host wants to jump in. you know
That's right. And you should speak to the producer. I mean, the host of the segment, great. But actually, when you get, if you're in a TV kind of interview thing, even if you're remote, ask to speak to the producer because the producer wants a certain type of result of that interview. And that's one of my recommendations. If the host is the producer, sometimes they are, but usually there's another producer and say, so here's my idea. Why did you select me? What do you want to, what are you kind of expecting me to say? So you want to, get that information down because those are the people that are really running, media. It's not the people on camera.
So, in launching your own business in this program, it sounds very valuable for people that whether you are thinking about starting a podcast or
Mhm.
you already have one and you want to level up, is to contact you. How do they contact you?
I would just say contact me through LinkedIn at this point.
LinkedIn? Okay.
I'm on LinkedIn all day. Sometimes I don't look at emails. I'm focused on editing something or doing whatever. So my eyeballs and ears are not always on social media or email. But send me a message on LinkedIn. It throws up an alert for me. Say hello. Say you're interested in having a conversation, and then I'll send you a calendar link and we book. And I talk to anybody for 15 minutes for free that want to have a burning question answered. If I can answer that question for you in that 15 minutes, that's my gift to you. There you go.
So, is there anything else that you'd like people to know about the world of podcasting and media in relation to what you do and can do for them?
Well, I would say that everybody today needs some kind of media message that they're putting their message out there for what they do in the world. So either it's a YouTube channel or it's a podcast or it's a something. If you don't have something that's communicating the media message for your brand, then there's 80,000 people that are running right over you because you're not doing it,
Yeah.
and they are. So you really have to have something that is more than something that's just sitting on your website or whatever. Because here's the thing, if I'm a producer in television or if I'm a host of a show and I do a search for somebody with an expertise, and there's four people out there and one of them has a podcast, well, guess who I'm going to call? The one that can talk. Okay. So that's where the producers' heads are. When they have someone they perceive an expert or they're looking for an expert. If you're doing a podcast and you've been doing it for a year and it's about a particular subject, and they can listen to it and say, this person's pretty good, but there's five other people who are experts in that same area, they're going to choose you. That's why
Good
it's really
point.
important. You have to think of what are producers looking for, what are television producers that have segments to fill that are looking for certain experts in a particular professional area. So that's why it's important to have some kind of a media platform that's tied to your brand that's communicating your media message out to the world. And it's not that hard to do these days, but
Oh,
I would
really
say
not.
you really have to think through how you're going to be presenting that message. That's why I created this media strategy program, because part of what people miss and what audiences find interesting is your story of who you are as a person, your life, what we call the hero's journey of your life. Why does someone engage with you? Because they find your personal life story interesting. A lot of people who do a podcast leave that out. That's the first thing we talk about.
Yeah, and I remember you talking to me about that when we started Goodnight Maryland
Yeah.
Radio. But I think, one of the things that I think is important is to not just go, oh, let's start a podcast, but really and truly, what is the message that you have to the world and getting really clear about it and keeping it simple. One of my things with Life Bites has always been little bites of life to get you thinking and inspired about moving your life forward. So whether it's life, business, or media, we're inspiring you in some way and making sure that it's fun and entertaining so it's not so heady, and it's simple enough to where people can go, oh, okay, I get that. So I think the key here is if you are looking at starting a podcast, you're leveling up your podcast, or you're wanting to improve your own media presence, this is the guy to call. And I'm going to tell you why it's the guy to call, because not only does he do well in the realm of podcasting for the talk interview, but I can tell you firsthand, because Randall and I both produce this show on Marilyn Monroe, it's a dramatic series. We are one of the first to ever come forth with this type of dramatic acting podcast around Marilyn Monroe. And I have to say, hands down, Randall, you did a great job on sound editing and sound design. So not only can you do that, but you can actually work in the creative realm where it's not just a talking podcast, but a dramatic series as well.
Well, thank you for that. And I can tell everyone who's watching out there that if you're an author of a book, think about your book. If it's a novel, if it's fiction, that could be a dramatic series that can help sell the book.
Oh,
So that's
yeah.
another thing that I'm starting to help people on in designing a dramatic series if they have a novel. And then if they have a nonfiction book, then you can go the traditional talk radio route. Or recently I came up with an idea of how to actually dramatize a nonfiction book. And that's something that's brand new that I'm developing.
Oh, I can't even wait to hear on that one because that's really interesting. So he's
Yeah.
always an innovator. He's always creating. He's always getting curious, and he's always pushing the envelope. So I'm going to say, find him on LinkedIn, Randall Libero, and you're off the press with developing your own company. So get him while you can, because let me tell you, this man's going to get very busy very quickly. So thank you so much, Randall, for being on the show today.
Thanks, Anita. It's been a real pleasure.
Randall Libero, media executive, my fellow colleague on Maryland Behind the Icon. I'm going to give us a shameless plug. Go to behindtheicon.com and give it a listen, because you get to hear firsthand some of his talents. So thanks again. So for Life Bites and Nina Bosky, remember to take a bite out of life before life takes a bite out of you.